Hey everybody, it's Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini, and welcome to episode number 103 of WIP Wednesdays. WIP, for those of you that are tuning in new, stands for Work in Progress, which just means that we come on here for a weekly live show, and I'm usually doing some type of a demo, tutorial, answering questions that y'all have submitted, and I'm doing some fun stuff. Talking sewing and quilting and other types of crafts. So let's make sure that y'all can see me and hear me. I'm coming to you from my home crafting studio here, and we live in North Central Florida where it looks like it's about to pour again. Let's see who we have tuning in here. Hey, Kathy tuning in from Illinois. We got Jean from steamy Minnesota, she says. Kay is tuning in from just east of us here near Jacksonville, Florida. Susie's in the house from Michigan. Hey, Susie. Awesome. Well, y'all can see me and hear me, looks like. It sounds good. Hi, Claudia. Okay, great. And Janice says loud and clear from steamy Bradenton, Florida. I feel like a lot of places are steamy right now. Okay, so for today's show, I'm going to do partly answering a couple of questions that some of you have submitted via the form. And that's, let me just give a little plug real quick. If you have questions specific to anything that I do, you know, the sewing, the quilting stuff, the tutorials, maybe you're giving one of my classes or a tutorial a try and you have some questions, make sure that you use the link that we've included in the description box below this video if you're catching us on YouTube. And if you're watching us on the Crafty Gemini Facebook page, we put it inside the post description. You'll see the link there. Okay, so y'all can always submit questions because every week as we prepare for these live shows, my team and I go through and we kind of pick out questions. Sometimes we pick based on a theme or based on something that we're doing. And I got two good ones today that aren't too long to answer. And I think one of them, a lot of people might be surprised. Okay. Hi, Tina. Great. Lee from Massachusetts is in the house, and Diane from Warwick, Maryland. Okay, so everything looks good. Let's go ahead and switch to my over-the-shoulder camera shot. We're going to start off with the demo, and my demo today is going to be on my Teensy Baskets. Now, I did a full step-by-step tutorial on these baskets a couple weeks ago, last month maybe? I think it was last month on this one. It's on my YouTube channel, so we included the link as well for the tutorial. If you don't want to watch this long, drawn-out kind of chit-chatting back and forth on the live show, you can just watch now and then go back and watch the tutorial when you have your fabric and your sewing time set aside so that you can make these. When I tell you this is a quick project, it's super quick, okay? And we're starting off with 10-inch by 10-inch squares. So if you're a quilter, chances are you probably got some 10-inch pre-cut squares. Maybe you use some of them in a project and you got some left over. Or if you have fat quarters, yardage left over, you can cut them down, okay? So super cute little baskets. I'm going to make a Halloween-y themed one. I love Halloween. And we have a Halloween party at our house every year. So I've been playing around with my new Cricut Joy and making some little cards and things. So I'm thinking the invitations might be, depends on how many I need to make, but they might be like a little Halloween-y basket like this one. So I'm going to make one to see how it looks with these fabrics, of course. And then I have the strap fabric here is going to be the same as the cat fabric that I have for the exterior. This black and white print is going to be my lining. And I'm thinking of putting maybe some little treats in here with a little handmade card invitation and tie it up with a little ribbon. I think that would be a super cute step up from last year's invitations. A little water. And let's get started. As I'm doing this demo, I'm going to answer one of the questions that we pulled from y'all's submissions. And this one is from Lynn. And Lynn asks, what is the difference between light fusible batting and cotton woven interfacing, both of which you used on your boxy pouch tutorial, and both of which I'm using on my Teensy Basket tutorial. So another recent tutorial that I posted was for a boxy zippered pouch. And so oftentimes, if it's a project that on the exterior I want a little bit of body, and then the lining, I just want it to have a crisper finish. That's when you'll often see me use the combination of those two. Bozal light fusible batting and the Bozal cotton woven interfacing, which is called Fashion Fuse. Let me grab the other one here. I always think it's fun to make things up in several different fabric combinations. Because say you don't like florals and you see this one, you'll be like, not interested in making it. But then you might see this one and be like, oh, now that's cute, right? So I like to always show it off in a few different fabric combos. Okay. Oh, Lynn says, that's me. Yes. So we're answering your question, Lynn. Okay. So this is the exterior. I wanted to add a little bit of body to it. So this one has been already fused to the light fusible batting. This is the lining, which if you're a bag maker or you've attempted some type of a bag or a pouch, I would say maybe 7 or 8 times out of 10 you'll see a designer use cotton woven fusible interfacing, whether it's a Bosal Fashion Fuse, maybe a Pellon Shape Flex. You'll see Pellon SF101. They're similar products. They're really, really light, thin cotton fabric that just feels scratchy on one side because it has tiny dots of adhesive. So here they are on the fabrics, which you can't really tell too much unless you had a piece of the same exact fabric next to it. And y'all know I like to kind of drape things like this. You see how this, it's a little bit stiff. The fabric is not like bending so much as if it's drapey because it's already been fused. But if I grab a chunk of the regular fabric, you'll see how much drapier this is. You see how it like folds? When I was shaking this one, you couldn't really see the back side of it unless I flip it over because it doesn't drape that much to where it's flipping and flopping. But on the fabric itself, notice when I move it, you can definitely see the wrong side of the fabric because it's that drapey, okay? So I would say as you continue to experiment and maybe try your hand at a lot of my different tutorials, you will start to kind of gain the knowledge and like the tactile knowledge more than anything to know, okay, when I use this specific interfacing, it makes, if I'm using just quilting cotton, it will make it like this. So as you start picking different bag projects and pouch projects, you'll know just based on the fabric that you selected and the project shape and the way it's supposed to be used, you'll know like, okay, the pattern calls for this interfacing, but I kind of like the way that this light fusible batting or a foam interfacing, the way that it makes the fabric feel for the exterior, and you might choose that. So a lot of times for beginners, I recommend just going off of what the pattern designer says in their pattern, at least for the first time that you make it, so you can see where you want to go in and possibly change something or adjust measurements. But the first time it's good to just follow directions, as much as some of us don't like to sometimes. But the next one is the cotton woven fusible interface. Well, that's the one that I was talking about. Let me grab the light fusible batting here. So these are the two interfacings that we're talking about, and that's why I titled this show Back to Basics. Some basic stuff because I thought this is good to recap, especially for those of you that maybe are just now dabbling in some of these little cutesy small projects, baskets, pouches, which I have dozens of tutorials on my YouTube channel. For those of you that maybe are new, you can check me out at The Crafty Gemini is the name of the channel. So this one, you can see the difference just off the bat. This one is pretty translucent. It drapes when I move it like this, similar to the cotton fabric, the same way that we did with the kitty fabric here. So it's drapey and it just looks like a really thin cotton fabric. On the back side here, I can feel a little bit of scratchiness because it has tiny dots of adhesive, okay? So that's what makes it stick and fuse to the back of your fabric so you don't have to necessarily stitch through it. And then it takes the cotton fabric one level up in terms of body and stiffness. It's not going to make it super crisp because the interfacing itself is not super crisp. So that's what you have to understand is like, what are the characteristics of the interfacing itself? And then what is it going to add or bring to the fabric once it is put together? And it can be slightly different whether it's a fusible product and a non-fusible or a sew-in product because you have to also account for the glue. Where if I take this cotton woven fusible interfacing and I kind of swing it around like this, it's kind of drapey like a lightweight muslin fabric, cotton, right? But the dots of adhesive are really, really tiny. When we add heat to this and fuse it to the back of the fabric, this adhesive is going to melt. And you know what happens when glue dries, right? It stiffens up and hardens when it finishes drying in place. So you kind of have to account for that little bit of stiffness that's going to be added because you've now melted adhesive and added that interfacing to your fabric, okay? So I mean, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense in your mind if you've never used these types of products, but once you start using them, you will get it, okay? You will see, you'll be like, oh yeah, it felt a little bit light, but then when I combine the two, this one has that cotton woven fusible interfacing fused to it. So it's still cotton fabric, it's just like you're adding a little thin cotton muslin to it, so it gives a little bit more body, but it also, I often use the word crisp. When I said earlier, if I want to make it have a crisp lining, it helps with that because 100% cotton wrinkles like crazy, right? We all know that if you've ever had cotton clothes. Well, if I'm making a project like these little teensy baskets that requires me to flip it right side out, you're going to be wrinkling that fabric quite a bit, okay? And if it's just fabric by itself, it makes it trickier, especially in a small project like this, to get back in there and really smooth out all those wrinkles after the fact. However, if you fuse that lining fabric to the cotton woven fusible interfacing, okay, in my case the fashion fuse, it makes it easier. It's like the adhesive, you're like reheating it up, and so it helps lay everything a lot flatter inside the finished project, okay, after. So you'll see when we get there. Okay, Tina says, I only have medium weight Pellon. Will it work? I hope so. I have a lot and don't want to purchase more. I'm not sure what medium weight Pellon is. I mean, I have different medium weight Pellon products, but you got to look at what the code is after, like what the number is. They're all going to be a different type. It can be woven, non-woven, crisp, double-sided fusible, single-sided fusible. So medium weight Pellon really doesn't tell me too much about the specific product. But if you tell me what it is, if I have experience with it, then I can speak to it. But the light fusible batting, let's show that one here. And let's bring this guy back out. This one is still pretty translucent, right? Because I can see the grid lines of my table underneath, but it's a lot thicker. Can you see how this is lying flat against the table and this is a little bit thicker? You see that? So it's adding loft and body to it. Now in the tutorial I mentioned, like if you have just quilt batting scraps, you can use quilt batting. It doesn't really matter too much the loft. You don't want to use something that's like this puffy inside a little basket like this. It's going to be hard to work with. When you're working with smaller areas, especially something that goes inside like this, you have these tight corners here. The bulkier the interfacing you use, or the fabric, okay, especially if you're combining a thick fabric with a bulky interfacing, it's going to be a nightmare to make something like this. That's why I chose to go with the Bosal light fusible batting instead of, say, foam interfacing, okay? So those are things that you know, as a designer, I think about that ahead of time because I know, okay, this is kind of small. I need this to fit to the inside. If it's too bulky, it's going to be like really clunky and hard to flip out and get to lie flat. So those are just things that you end up learning over time. But in these two, this one is similar to this in that it doesn't make it super stiff. These are not crisp interfacings like a Durafuse would be. And I have some here. I'll just pull some out visually to show you. It's tricky too because all these interfacings tend to be white. You can find some of them in black, but this is a crisp non-woven interfacing. Do you see how stiff this is? This is like me having maybe like a lightweight cardstock in my hand, but it's shiny on one side because it has adhesive. So I could fuse this to fabric and make my fabric somewhat paper-like. You see how it wrinkles? Like it folds and crinkles instead of like drapier, soft, rounded folds, okay? This is a totally different interfacing. So you got to be careful. They're not completely interchangeable, okay? These are going to give completely different shape and body to your finished project. So these are good ones to start off with, even, you know, just some cotton quilt batting, but this one especially is very, very popular, okay? All right. Oh, Deborah says they make great thread catchers for her serger. Awesome. I'm glad you already gave them a try, Deborah. Let's see. Marina's asking, do you starch the fabric before you adhere the fusible interfacing? I'm new here and trying to learn as much as possible. So I do, because I starch all my fabric before I even cut. And for sure it's cut before I fuse it. So I definitely starch everything beforehand, okay? And that's just how I like to do it. I like my fabric to be as flat, smooth, and crisp as possible so that I can get the most accurate measurements. If you can cut accurately and then you make sure to sew accurately, that's how you end up getting the best results in your finished projects, okay? So anyway, I was saying this one is like a little bit loftier. It's still pretty translucent. And again, this is light fusible batting, which we're currently sold out of, but the link is in the description box and you can add yourself to the wait list there. As soon as we can restock it, our system will send you an automatic email when you can order it. But it's really popular and I use it a ton. So, excuse me, let me drink some water. Whoo, boy, I'm running my mouth today. Okay, so this has a little bit of loft, not like a super medium to thick lofted quilt batting, but it's a little bit lighter. If you have fusible fleece at home, you could use that, just not a super thick one like I said earlier. So again, they're both pretty lightweight and they're fusible. So if you are not going to be using a fusible product, you got to make sure to stitch through your layers because otherwise they won't adhere. So we have our two squares, 10 inch by 10 inches both. My exterior gets fused to the light fusible batting, something with a little body so it's, you know, softer and like loftier on the outside. And then I have my fashion fused to the lining. Then I went in and traced out 3 inch by 3 inch squares on all four corners of both. And we're going to take scissors and carefully cut these out. Excuse me. These allergies this week have been killing me. Okay, I'm using scissors because if I go in with a rotary cutter, y'all, you got to stop shy of that corner. I don't want you going past it. Then you end up cutting further, right, beyond the line, and you don't want that. So just to be super safe, I like to use scissors, and I'll just use it so that the tip of the scissors stop right at that 90-degree angle corner of the squares. Janice says, I've learned from Vanessa, iron everything again and again, and it makes for huge success. Absolutely. All the kids that I've ever taught, they all know. I tell them, after you press a seam, or excuse me, after you sew a seam, you press a seam. Oh, there goes my extension table for the sewing machine, which we're going to use in a minute. After you sew, well, for sure at the prep work, you definitely have to press everything. But after I sew a seam, I press. And they used to hate it. But you got to do it if you want everything to show up nice and crisp, right? You want clean, fresh, crisp results that look handmade instead of homemade, I guess. Let's see. And then, of course, just read the manufacturer's instructions for the fusible interfacings that you're using, because some of them require steam. Some of them will say, like, use a damp cloth over top of it and then add heat. Some, like I said, require steam. Some just say to add heat, you know. It just depends on whose product you're using. Karen says, if I wanted to make the basket bigger, would I use a thicker batting? You could. You don't have to, but you could. It just depends on also what you're going to put in it, okay? If you're going to put something super heavy and you're not going to put nothing at the bottom to give it a little bit of body, then it's going to kind of hang at the bottom with the weight of whatever you put in it. Unless you make like a little false bottom, like we often do with bags, to give the bottom some shape and rigidity to hold the weight of what you plan to put in it. Okay, I'll save these little squares. You can use them for other stuff. And then we're going to start stitching this up. So I just bring in the edges together and 1/4 inch seam allowance. On the lining, we're going to do the same thing, but I'm going to use a slightly bigger seam allowance. And of course, again, I have a step-by-step tutorial for this project. I just wanted to take that time to talk a little bit about those interfacings. I'm going to move my needle position over and stitch this up real quick. Remember, this is a construction seam, so when you're first making it, the shape, those 4 corners that give you the box shape to the basket, you want to shorten that stitch length. I'm going to go down to 2 millimeters in stitch length, and that way I know that my stitches will be short and tight, and they will help hold those side seams together. And I just come off the edge. There's a slight angle there, so we're just going to go off the edge and back stitch if you want. And then I just go over and grab the next one, do the same thing. So we're going to do that to all 4 corners on both. But I'll talk about kind of sliding the fabric over a little bit when we do the lining, just so we end up with a larger seam allowance. And y'all know what that means, right? Who here knows if I use a bigger seam allowance on the lining, what is that going to help me do in the finished project? Let's see how many of y'all watch my tutorials or take my online courses. Hi, Tamara, tuning in from almost 100 degrees Chicago. Okay, and I'm back stitching at the top and at the bottom, y'all, just to help secure these stitches. Okay. Let's see how this is going to turn out. And I have enough of different Halloween prints that I think I might end up making several of these little baskets, like I said, to give the decorations. I mean, decorations. The invitations. I was thinking of doing them as like the goodie bags at the end of the night. We usually have like some bags with little treats and stuff inside for the kids that come, but the invitations will be less than who ends up coming. So I think this will have me making less of them than more. Okay. Yes, Jennifer says it makes the lining fits better. Winless Original says, I love your pop quizzes. Thank you. The teacher in me. Beverly says it helps the lining fit nice and tight. Yes, y'all got it perfectly. Jean says it will fit better in the bag. The lining will fit better inside, says Gloria. Y'all know. You get 5 stars, A+. Good job. Okay, so here we are at the lining. And I'm going to start at the top at 1/4 inch. I'll backstitch and go down. And I go in about 1 inch. Then I'm going to swipe this over just so I can come over further than 1/4 inch. And, you know, somewhere like 3/8 to 1/2 inch is what I'll end up eating up instead. On a project like this, because it's so narrow all the way, you know, down the sides, you can't eat up too big of a seam allowance, otherwise it won't sit in the inside of the basket. So it's just a little bit. And like I say in the tutorial, if you're a beginner, don't worry about that. Just stitch it straight down. Just use the same solid seam allowance straight down. I'd rather you do that than, you know, get bogged down with trying to do half of a longer seam allowance and end up with wonkier seams in the end. All right, almost there. And I have half of the straps, or the little straps, done, so I'll finish one off here with y'all. And then we just have to put it together, and we'll have a little teensy fabric basket. I had a guy on Instagram recently tag me because he was making a bunch of these for his wife and her coworkers. They turned out so cute. I think he made like a dozen of them, and he tagged me on it, and I shared it on my Instagram stories. Oh my gosh, it looks so cute. So many cute fabric combos. He had like a whole setup where he had all his squares cut out, you know, one exterior, one lining, and then had all his handles cut out. And he got to work assembly line style making all those for gifts. Everybody, I'm like, they're going to love those. All right. So you should end up with two little boxes like this. So now you know when you're trying to create something, you want that shape. You start off with a square, cut off chunks in the corners, and then you end up with a little bitty box, okay? Let's work on, I'm just going to grab this smaller mat. The handles here. Where's my other one? It's what happens when you have small pieces of fabric. Oh, there it is, the finished one. So we're trying to make a little strap like this. If you've taken any of my classes, bag clubs, if you've been in my mini bag clubs, we do this a lot. We make a lot of these little straps. You start with a rectangular strip like this. We fold it in half, right, down the middle. Then we bring in the outer long edges, and then we refold the whole thing down the center crease line again. Give it a really good press, and if you have a Tailors clapper, we just got these back in stock. This helps set your creases really nice and flat. It's great for hems too. Patchwork also, wherever you're pressing your seam allowance to. And then we're going to top stitch about 1/8 of an inch over from both long edges. And because this is top stitch, when you hear top stitch, that means it's not a construction stitch. It's just like a little decorative finish, or in our case, both. It's holding this open edge and then finishing it off so that it's more balanced on the opposite side. So I'm going to lengthen to 3 millimeters in stitch length, and I'm just going to put the needle in the center, and I'll just watch it as I stitch down here. And then you make 2 of these. Those are your little strap, your handles, that is. You can make them longer, you can make them shorter if you want to. I wanted these to be a little bit longer just so that they weren't too short to kind of interfere with your fingers and what you have inside the basket. So I made them slightly longer, but again, it's up to you. You know, you can change it for whatever you're planning to use the basket for. Trim off the thread tails. And I always like to just double check and measure these guys, because even though you think you cut the fabric out accurately, some things could have moved on you. And just to mention, these two are interfaced. We use the cotton woven fusible interfacing on these guys, but they look to be the same length, so I can move on. Oh, where did my chat go? Let me pull this up again. I must have swiped the screen or something. Okay, I totally lost my chat. My whole chat box is gone. Okay, well, if you have questions, keep typing them in there. Now they should populate for me. Huh? No, I had to refresh the page, but I haven't seen anything else come in. That's weird. All right, so we're going to take one of these, and I like to base it to the outer box. So if this is my exterior, that's where I'm going to do it. And I'm just going to fold this. Like, you put it sideways, horizontal like this, and then just make like a smiley face. And then the 2 short edges, I'm just going to attach them here. And I don't like to go all the way into the corner, so I'll usually just put them about 1/2 of an inch in from the outer edges. Yeah, it literally blanked out on me. No chat at all. Oh well. If you have a question there that you need me to answer, just let me know. All right, so I'm going to do this, and I'm going to place it here. Usually if you're making like a bigger tote bag, you know, we tell you measurements off the side seams and measure over and mark and put them here. You only have this much to work with. Even if you're off a little bit, the handle can't really go anywhere else, right? Like, it's still going to be in a spot where you can hold it. So I usually will place one visually how it looks decent to me, and then remember to place it on the opposite side. So we're going to come here. Okay, now I see the chat. I'm starting to see stuff come in. And then I'll do the same thing to the other side, and all I do is I can bring down the side seams here. Like, if I match up the side seams, I can see where that one was, and as long as I'm consistent in aligning the next one here, then it doesn't really matter what the distance is, right? They're all just going to match up and be equally balanced handles on here. So that's just another tip too. You can place one the way you like it and then make the other one match up. So in other words, I have these here. If I go like this and match up the side seams, look at that. I'm telling you, you can't really go too far off. Like there's nowhere for it to go. So you can't really mess it up too bad. This one could stand to come over a bit like that. All right, so those are there. We're going to baste stitch these into place just so they don't move on us when we go in to add the lining fabric. And baste stitching, so notice the terminology. Top stitching, I said, that tells me it's not a construction stitch. It's decorative. It's going to show. It's going to be on top. So that I know, I lengthen it because usually longer stitches tend to show up better and look nicer and cleaner on the outside. The construction stitches, construction, right? It's going to build your project. You want those stitches to be short and tight. And then basting is like temporary stitches. Back in the days, if you're doing garment sewing and stuff, a lot of the basting stitches were done by hand and they would pull them out because they're just in place to hold something temporarily while you went in and sewed something else to it. In our case, we're not taking out these stitches, but you can lengthen the stitch length to a typical basting stitch. On my machine, the longest straight stitch I can do is 5mm straight stitch, and so I'm just going to go across it. You don't even really have to back stitch because it's not going nowhere. The next step is going to be to add the lining. But if it was like handles or straps or hardware tabs or something in between layers, you'd often see me go back in and reinforce that a little bit and do some back stitching and stuff so that it doesn't move on me. But this is just a way of holding this in place without leaving my clips in there, basically, for the next sewing step. And I just have the fabric straps aligned with the top edge, and I'll do a back stitch there. Just I feel like the strap might be a little bit heavy to just leave it loose, and I don't want it to move on me. So I'm just aligning it to the top edge, and then the stitching is only 1/8 of an inch down. You don't want it to go in further than your seam allowance, okay? Let's see. Oh, I can't even see. My eyes are like glaring over. Okay. Y'all are talking about a wooden spatula at Dollar Tree that, oh, that camera went out. Weird. Okay. So I'm going to baste the other one. I'll back stitch just because sometimes when the stitches are really big, and keep this in mind for other projects if you're basting, when you use really long basting stitches, if you don't secure it at either end and there's not long enough of a seam that you stitched across, those stitches are so long and loose that if it's only like this, these straps are so narrow that it's only like 2 or 3 stitches holding it. So if it's loose on both ends, any wiggling of that strap, it might come out. And that's why I'm like, I'll back stitch just to secure it. Because the last thing you want is to go in, stitching your lining, flip this sucker all the way right side out and think you're done, and then see that one of the straps is like halfway out the seam because it moved on you, okay, in between the layers. You got to be careful. Okay. Another thing you can do is not use a basting stitch. We say basting because it's kind of automatic since it's going to be hidden in between the 2 layers, and we know that we're just doing that to hold them in place. But you can always baste with shorter stitches, especially if you're not going to go in and take it out. It doesn't really matter. All right, so that's it. These are the components. We have our lining fabric, exterior, and the handles basted to the exterior. So now these 2 need to come together pretty sides touching, just like we sew anything else, okay? So if I leave this one facing out, then one of them needs to be flipped right side out so that they can be pretty sides touching. So I'm going to flip the lining one right side out, but before I do that, I'm going to come in here. Remember I sewed a slightly larger seam allowance? I'm just going to shave off a little bit of the seam allowance here just to help reduce some bulk in those tight corners. So I'll do this. Okay. Yeah, I have like 5 clappers, y'all. And I went ahead and bought one this year when I went to QuiltCon from a fancy like custom clapper making guy. I forget the name, but it's one of my favorites. It was so expensive. But isn't it gorgeous? We don't sell these in the shop. We sell the smaller ones. And these come like different sizes. We only carry the small just because it's so good to use for so many things, and it's the more affordable option than like these fancy, fancy custom made ones. But that one was like 60 bucks or something. Ah, you didn't hear that. So let's go ahead and grab this. We're going to flip this right side out. So see why it's important to have back stitch at the beginning of all these seams when we were sewing those corner edges together, okay? Let's see. Maria Elena says, I love the black fabric. I know, me too. I think we sold out of it in the shop. We had this. It sold out. We sold one bolt at a retreat. People were like practically fighting for, like, how much is there left? I'll take what's left. I'll take 2.5, 3 yards. It's a great, like, neutral but kind of abstract neutral. I don't know. It's great for a ton of stuff. And y'all have seen it a lot, I'm sure. Especially those of you in my bag clubs. All right, so now we're going to align seam to seam and then send the seam allowances in opposite directions just to help reduce some bulk there. Oh, here are my clips. All right, same thing. I'm just matching the intersections. I like to match intersections first because that's the most important part, right? First, and then I'll go in and fill in. But if your squares were the same size when you began, those 10 inches by 10 inches, if you use proper seam allowance like I did, and you know everything was the correct size and your seam allowances were right, you shouldn't have too much extra in any one side. Those of you that do have, something is wrong either in the cutting and the measuring, or if you tried to make it without interfacing. The fusible interfacings, regardless of which one you use, excuse me, are going to kind of, how do I say it? Like when I say crisp, like they add a little bit of crispness to the fabric, it's going to help keep it there, right? It's glue. You're sticking it on there and the fabric is not going to be as easily distortable. Is that even a word? You won't be able to like stretch it out of place and distort it, because it has interfacing on both of them. If you've ever made a project where you have interfacing on one fabric layer and you don't use it on the other, you'll oftentimes notice, like even if you were very, very precise in your cutting and sewing, you might notice that the one that wasn't interfaced is like all of a sudden bigger. That's why. It's cotton. The weave on quilting cotton, even premium quilting cotton, is not that tight of a weave, so you can easily distort it. Yes, Sylvia says gives it structure. There you go. That's the perfect terminology to use. Belinda says you should sell them in your shop. I do. I need to see if he does wholesale. I think he did tell me that he did wholesale. All right. So now we need to just leave an opening because that's it, right? We're going to stitch across, or not across, around the top here. And then we're going to need to flip it right side out. So my tip to you, do not leave an opening anywhere where the handles are. There's just too much going on and it's not necessary. You can, but why? Just leave those be. On the other sides, though, there's nothing going on, so I'm going to just make a little mark. Don't do this in pen, but I'm doing it so y'all can see. Do it in fabric marker. I'm just doing a little pen here and a little pen here. You don't have much room to leave open here, so if you know that you struggle, if you're one of those people that says, oh, I hate birthing bags, leave yourself a little bit more because you're probably going to struggle to flip this right side out. So I'm going to do my best to make it look kind of easy, even though it does take a little bit of time. Avoid leaving an opening here where the seams are. So notice I'm starting about 1/2 of an inch down from this seam and stopping about 1/2 of an inch up from this seam. You always want to leave your opening in a smooth, straight area. If it's curved, I would avoid it. If there's a seam, avoid it. If there's a pocket, hardware tabs, anything else going on there, try to avoid it if you can. For us, it's going to be right here, okay? And that just means that in this whole area, I'm not going to stitch. And I'm going to have these 2.5 inches to work with for flipping my little basket right side out. It's okay. We can do it. Now you might be wondering, how in the world are you going to sew this on a sewing machine like this? Even if you remove the free arm, it doesn't reach, right? Like I can't get it under here to stitch it up. Well, it's no big deal. So this is a helpful tip for those of you that sew on sewing machines, maybe vintage machines, maybe other newer machines that you like inset into a table or a cabinet. You want to sew it from the inside. So instead of leaving it to the outside, like on the base of the machine, I'm sliding the presser foot to the inside of the bag and stitching it around. This is how you would do any small circumference. If I'm making pajamas for little kids, this is how I do it. Because the circumference of, say, a cuff on a wrist of pajamas for a toddler is not going to be able to fit over top of this, okay, even without the free arm. So this is how I do it from the inside out. Let's go back and set our seam. We're using, again, 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, so I'm moving my needle over. And now this is construction. We're constructing the whole basket, right? We want the lining to stay attached to the exterior, so I'm going short on the stitch length. And you definitely want to backstitch here at the beginning and at the end, because you're going to put so much stress on those seams when you're flipping this whole thing out that if you didn't backstitch, it's going to come apart. You're going to have to stitch it again. Maria Elena's asking how many inches are the handles. So in the tutorial, I say they're 2 inches by 7 inches, and I think I did cut them to the same size for this demo. but 2 inches by 7 inches. I go over all the dimensions in the actual tutorial. This is more of a long, drawn out demo just to show you, you know, and share some tips, talk about the interfacing, share with you how I do it, and that way, if you decide that you want to give this project a try, you can watch the step-by-step interfacing. You can watch the step-by-step interfacing, tutorial without me talking, and it's a lot shorter than a live show. Now, I'm on the side that has the handles, and all I like to do is through the layers I can feel the added bulk. So what I do is I just make sure before I go over it that it's completely flat, because although we basted it, it was only 1/8 of an inch down from the edge. That means that further down into the handle, it could have twisted or slightly moved, and so I just like to make sure before I go over it that it's flat and in place, okay, before I keep going. And now we're getting to a side seam, so I'll just keep going over it carefully. Now, if you use a thicker interfacing for the exterior, it's not going to sew this easily. So this is another reason I use the light fusible batting. The thicker the interfacing, the chunkier these seams are going to be, and the more bulk you're going to have at the areas where you have those handles also, because you got to think about those 4 layers of interface fabric being added. Okay, so I don't know if y'all can see this, but this handle, I think this was maybe the first one I did. It's already coming off because I didn't backstitch at the beginning. So I'm glad I looked, and I can see that this edge is not matching the side edge, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. You don't want it to swipe out on you. I want that straight edge to be straight against the edge of the fabric right here. So I'm actually going to have to keep an eye on this as I go through, because there's no sense in trying to baste that and then going over it. But now that I can see the edge, hold on, readjust. So backstitch on those basting. It's mostly because of how narrow the straps are, okay? If it was a bigger piece, you'd have more stitches across to hold it. But it's just what I talked about earlier, okay? So even though your layers might be together, they might be pinned, they might be clipped, just keep an eye on what you're doing. And if it's multiple layers, keep an eye out as you go through it, because it's a lot easier to catch it here and fix it than it is to, like I said, stitch the whole thing, flip it right side out, and then say, no. All right, I came back to the beginning of the opening, backstitched. I hope I backstitched enough. That was like 2 or 3 stitches. And I really should have thread snips. You should not be cutting threads with these big things, because sometimes you're trying to move quick and you'll, like, with these huge scissors, I mean, you could easily just cut into the whole basket. Ask me how I know. Do as I say, not as I do, y'all. Okay, now let's find the opening. Here we are. And I just like to kind of, you saw me turn it a little bit. I'm just quickly looking to see, do I have a lot of seam allowance sticking up bulkier in one area than the other? If not, we can move on. And I don't. I was pretty consistent with that seam allowance, so I'll just leave that. Now we're just going to flip this whole thing right side out. All right. Kate says, could you use a little dab of glue on the handle? You could. I don't know how much help it's going to be without some type of basting stitch, because the handle is so thick, right? We have 4 layers of fabric and interfacing folded up. So a little bit of glue is going to hold kind of like the bottom half of it down, but that top half, it can still move on you. So stitching really is going to be the most secure way. Okay. So just work it out little by little. And then again here, think about how much space I had to flip this out. The thicker the batting, the interfacing for the exterior, the bulkier it's going to be to get out of here. But this is pretty much done. I just don't like to yank on it too much. But once you get in there and you get some of it out, you can always just pull on the handles also a little bit at a time, and that will help you, start to bring it out, because the handles are like little handles. Okay, so this is my favorite part, how it goes from like some people will be like, look what I made, I'm done. Y'all, pressing makes all the difference, okay? Do not leave your projects like this. I mean, unless you want to, that's cool. But I'm coming in here where the hole is, and I'm going to poke out, first of all my corners. And these are just simple things that you can do that really will help elevate the finished project, even if the seams are a little wonky. Now, so you see how these corners are now popping out? That looks better. Now I'm going to go in that same opening as well, and I'm going to push out the seam allowance that's at the top. I'm just kind of creasing it. We're going to press all this, but because it's so little, you can easily come in here with your fingers and do this first, okay? Just to help everything go where it's supposed to. And I'm going to come across here and just pull there so that I can grab as much as I can of this. Punch it right down the middle, and that already looks a lot better, I think. Now we're going to come in with our iron. On the opening side, go ahead and tug on each side to get the raw edges to go in and under. And then I'm just folding up the fabric so that it is right in line at the top. I shouldn't be seeing a ton of lining fabric creeping out. I want it all to the inside, okay? So that that seam is running exactly around the top. And this is where that clapper comes in. Give it a good press and set it with the clapper. Look at that. You can't even tell there's an opening there. And I still have to push it in, but we are going to go in and press all this. I won't put a clip there now because I don't want to worry about possibly hitting the plastic clip as I continue to press this whole thing all around. But just push it in there and just take your time with the pressing part, because really this is the finishing. And I'm not just pressing like in a big circle. Because it's a little box, notice I'm pressing each side as its own to help give it that 4 square sided shape, okay? Or that 4-sided square shape. I said that backwards. Big difference. Okay, now let's go in and top stitch right around the top circumference here. And top stitch is long straight stitch, longer straight stitch. Again, we can't come in like this, so grab it at the corners, flip this thing wrong side out. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want the top stitching to show on the pretty side. And the pretty side is now on the inside, so I can do what I mentioned earlier, and that was, let me make sure this is the hole here? No, it's not here. Hold on. I want to take more of this fabric out. The hole's on the opposite side. Here. All right, so I'm going to start a little bit before my opening at this side seam. And I'm just stitching 1/8 of an inch in from the seam allowance, and I need to lengthen this. I'm going to do 3 millimeters. If your machine doesn't do good with a lot of bulk and you're using bulkier fabrics or interfacings, lengthen it even more than the 3 millimeter, okay? You'll need the stitches to be a little longer so the machine can pull more of it through. And then I just make sure to stop with the needle down, and I'm just going to rotate this around. The handles should be up and away, out of the way, because you're just top stitching around the box. But again, where the handles are, it's a little bulky, so just be paying attention to what you're doing because you might need to help it across just in that area. Like here I can feel there's some bulk. And I'm just using an 80-12 universal sewing machine needle. Again, if you're working with thicker fabrics or just a thicker fabric and interfacing combo, you might consider using a 90-12, or 90-12, Lord, 90-14 universal needle, okay, which is going to be bigger. You could use a 90-14 denim or jeans needle or even a top stitch needle, something like that that's a little bit stronger and can help you get through that bulk a little easier. All right, so I'm coming back around to my first initial stitches. I'm going to take a few over those first stitches, and then I'm just going to back stitch 1 or 2. Okay. Again, I should have taken out my thread snips. Don't cut into your projects. And then you're just going to have to give it another press. I know some of you are like, didn't you just press it and then you mangled it all up again? And it's part of sewing. We just got to press. Press, press, and then I'll show you what I do to a lot of my bags too to help shape them. Instead of pressing just from the inside, you see how interfacing that lining fabric gives it that crisp, smooth look? Look at that. I mean, I'm just saying. Use the bigger seam allowances in the lining if you can, because whoo! That's fresh. Look how good that looks. No baggy lining to be found, y'all. Try it. But the shaping on the outside, here's what I do. I pinch it at the side seam, lay it down so that the seam is going right down the side, and just give it a little press. The top can be a little bulky sometimes, but if you just press the bottom part of that with the iron and set it with the clapper, look at that crisp edge. That's going to help instead of it being kind of rounded like this one. Watch. We pinch, lay it down on your pressing mat, press, and clap it down. Look at that. Flat, crisp 90 degrees. It works really, really well for bags, pouches, tote bags, anything like that. Especially like after you wash them, if you give them a press like this, they'll just keep that shape beautifully. Look at that. You see the difference? And then this one is kind of more rounded. So let's finish off that one too. Yes, Marina says perfect little bag for wedding and baby shower favors to hold some treats. This little thing is like, you can make these baskets for any, look how, okay, y'all saw how it looked before when I was like, some people will say like, here, I'm done. And this is all pressing and one row of top stitching. Take the time to do it. It is absolutely worth it. Look at that. And then use that little tip. Anything that you have that's boxy like that, press it from the outside by pinching the seam like, ooh, yeah, that's fresh. That's, look how cute that's gonna look. The only thing that I'll mention here, this one doesn't really apply too much, but it could. The cats, you see some are upside down, some are sideways and whatever. So although it has a figure on it, like a character, a face, whatever, it's not a directional print because they're tossed cats. Does that make sense? Like they're facing every which direction. So it works for this. For those of you that want to use a directional print, just be mindful because you can't turn it any which way. We started off with just one 10-inch square. So because the corners get brought up and sewn to create the boxy basket shape here, you might have the design, you know, whatever the motif, the face, the character, the text looking sideways. So one example is this one that I made with the little gators in the swamp. And this one is a directional print. All the gators go like this. So the different sides, like these are sideways, these are upright. These look good. These are sideways, and then these are upside down. So that's just how it's going to turn out. Two are going to be sideways, one up and one down, because it's like a plus sign, right? After we cut out all those squares. So this one, it works out really well because the cats are just every which kind of way. How cute is that? Obsessed. And you can see the handles because they're also interfaced. That's how you see the structure and how something so small and so lightweight can stand up on its own. It's the combination of the fusible interfacings used, mostly the exterior, but also the handles are not flopping down because I used that cotton woven fusible interfacing and quadrupled it, right? Since we interfaced it first and then folded up the handles to make the straps. Okay, yes, Janice says press for success. I love it. So that's that. And then, so there's a free tutorial step-by-step just on how to make my teensy baskets that y'all can watch, okay? And the link is below, whether you're watching us on Facebook or on YouTube. And then I just have one more question to answer quickly here. This question is from Carol. And Carol asks, how can you tell if you have a polyester thread or a cotton thread in your bobbin? She says, when trying to match it up with the spool thread that you're going to be using. So of course, there are some ways, you know, they sell little tools that you can like put inside the top here of the spool of thread and put the bobbin so that you keep everything organized. Let's be real. I ain't doing that. I don't know if y'all are. If you are, great, super organized. I just take out a bobbin and throw it in something like this and keep it moving. And then when I need something a specific color, I might look at it and say, oh yeah, that's the same color. I'll just use it. So if you want to know, and if it's going to matter in your project, whether or not the thread is cotton or polyester, here is a quick test, which I thought, oh, this is a great question. I'll answer that today on WIP Wednesday. This is Aurifil. This is 100% cotton thread. Okay, cotton thread. And I brought out this gray mat because these threads are so light, but hopefully you'll see it. This thread, if it's cotton, 100% cotton, it's going to burn clean. In other words, when I light this, it's just going to go and just disintegrate into space. Let's try it and try not to burn my fingers. I'm just going to leave it like this. I'm trying to move my hand out of the way, but can you even see that? No. I'll just burn my hands for y'all. I'm just kidding. I mean, one little flame, that's not nothing. But so when I light it, how can I show this? Because when I go like this, my hand is in the way. When I light it, I'll try to go a longer tail here. It just like starts disappearing. Like it's just burning clean. There's no residue. There's no hard clump. It just is disappearing. Okay, that's a cotton thread. The polyester thread, on the other hand, if you do even just a tiny little bit of a burn, usually, and you saw with this one, there was no like smoking or anything like that. Sometimes, depending on the polyester thread, but if it's like a thicker thread, you'll see it more. It will, see, I melted a little bit and it doesn't just disappear. If I touch this end here, it feels like hard melted plastic, like it's like a chunk of hard stuff here. Let me see if I can. You can kind of see that little black nub on the end there. and it's hard. It feels like a hard melted plastic bit. The cotton does not do that, okay? The cotton just burns clean because it's cotton. It's a plant. It's just, Kathy says, we believe you. Don't get burnt. Oh, I'm fine. Trust me, I've been in bigger flames than this. So if you just melt a little bit, even on the polyester one, once it lights up and the flame goes out, once you touch it, it's hard. Like it feels like melted plastic. So that's all you have to do. If it does that and you feel like a hard nub on the end, it's polyester. You see? Okay, this is a good one. It's like a little black, like you see the black bits. And this, you see that little black nub? It's like a chunk of melted plastic because it's synthetic, okay? So that is how you know, whereas with the cotton, it's just gonna burn clean. And so that's just a quick way. Say you only use white or gray threads. You see that? It just burns clean. There's nothing. And when I touch the end, it's super smooth. It's like if you would have cut it right there. Okay, so that's a quick way. I was saying if you use, say, only like white or cream or gray threads and you have a combination of cotton and polyester, I would say the burn test is probably the quickest way if you can't remember what it is. Okay. Yes, Janice says, isn't that the same way that you would find out if fabric is 100% cotton? Yes, except that's going to be on a lot bigger scale. I can usually tell, you know, by touching the fabric, what kind of fiber content, at least some of the fiber content, because some of them, when they're like a blend between 2, 3, 4, 5 different fibers, then it's a little bit trickier. But if you're dealing with 100% cotton, 100% polyester fabric, yes, you could do a burn test on that as well. Okay. Let's see. Let me grab a sip of water. I'm just checking to see any last minute questions. All right. Kathy says, would mixing types be a problem? Probably polyester would cut the cotton thread. I have not had too big of an issue, but I don't usually mix the two. Like if I'm working on a quilt with cotton fabrics, I'm usually using cotton, right? If it's maybe like a mini quilt that I'm putting up on my wall, on my mini quilt wall over there, and it's kind of decorative purposes and stuff, I could get away with whatever. I could use cotton, I could use polyester. But y'all know that if I'm making like little things like this, I'll usually use a polyester. Like if I'm using if I'm making bags, something that has a lot of zippers, pouches, things like that, I usually will use a polyester just because it's stronger and it holds up better. So especially on my bigger bags, I absolutely am using polyester because I like to pack those suckers full, okay, of stuff. So I guess if it was like on a project like this, I don't think it would really matter whether you mix the cotton and the polyester or, you know, you just needed it for the top stitching because it matches the fabric or something like that. I don't think that's a big deal. But maybe in like garment sewing, it could cause an issue just because the cotton is weaker than the polyester because it is a natural fiber. Yeah. And then I sew it with a lot of stretch knit fabric, so I tend to have a lot more colors of polyester than I do cotton, okay? The cotton, I personally just use it for the quilting or patchwork if I'm making on a quilt. But then again, when I long arm quilt the quilts that I have made with all cotton fabric and cotton thread, I use polyester thread. So whatever that means. All right, let's see. Carol's asking, what were the seam allowances for the lining and the exterior? They were 1/4 of an inch. Okay, everything was 1/4 of an inch except in the lining, I start off with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance and then the last bit like for about an inch. And then the rest of the way down, I go a little bit bigger, 3/8, 1/2 of an inch, something like that. And I think on this one, I was closer to 1/2 an inch and that's why it turned out so fresh and smooth and clean. Look at that lining. There's no wrinkles there, y'all. No fabric pooling on the inside, and that's what that does, okay? All right, everybody, well, that's going to be it for today. Thank you for submitting questions. If you have any other questions that you want me to consider answering on a future episode of WIP Wednesday, use the form that we include in the description here underneath these videos. If you enjoyed it, if you learned something and got some value from these live shows, make sure to give it a thumbs up and feel free to share it with your crafty friends so maybe they can tune in next time. And then a quick note that we have changed the time for the live shows. We've moved them to 4:00 p.m. Eastern time now, okay, on Wednesday. Still same day, but just slightly pushed back a couple of hours. All right. Janice says, the roosters have been silent today. They haven't been that silent. I could hear some. They just haven't been quite as loud as last time. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and I will see y'all next week. Have a great weekend.